Hi, everybody. Thanks for sticking around for my presentation. This year, I got to work with Marin Wildfire Prevention Authority, and we'll get right down to it. So what is a Joint Powers Authority? MWPA is called a Joint Powers Authority. Sorry, my slides are not working on my end. But it's a legally created entity that allows two or more public agencies to jointly exercise common powers. So in our case, at the MWPA, it's a jointly or legally created entity between 17 different member agencies, local fire jurisdictions and community services districts, just various municipalities across the county, all that are working both for the suppression and the prevention of fire. Why would you make a joint powers authority? And it can be more efficient than distinct agencies just working together through traditional partnerships. And so when there's this common goal, and especially with a natural phenomenon and a problem to solve like wildfire that knows no jurisdictional boundaries, this is a model that's we're trying out at the MWPA, and hopefully if spread it to elsewhere if it proves to be a successful model. And another reason to form a JPA is to form a separate legal entity, which is especially important for the highly litigious topic of fuel reduction. So I really liked this question from Mike Jones' forestry presentation during orientation, and early on this year that really it kept coming up in my thinking as I realized really what the MWPA was all about. So what are we managing for? The MWPA's primary management objective is the protection of life and property, and the secondary objective is the preservation and enhancement of natural resources. And these two go together, of course, but it definitely affects the way that we channel funding and the way that we prioritize projects. We're here to protect our community, and with that, we'd like to enhance the biological resources and get the forests back to a healthy state. Oh, sorry, I'll go back. And so that really comes to play in our overall house out approach. And so every year we kind of choose a strategy with our work plan, and for the last couple of years we've continued to stick with this house out approach. We start from the walls of homes and work outwards, because that is what protects life and property the most, that and evacuation, route clearance, and detection and notifications. And so here on this slide, I puzzled together climate change, all of it all together. I did it, everybody. But with an organization like the MWPA, it evokes the question, but isn't centralization how we got into this mess? The centralization of power leading to the reduction of local control, leading to the lack of knowledge, local knowledge and decision making, and therefore bad decisions, which lead to adverse effects, and then the indifference to those externalities leading to more bad decisions. And that all leads to climate change and other bad things. But it's not necessarily true that the centralization of power leads to all those other things, as long as you cut it off at that first step. Don't reduce local control. And so it didn't take me long to realize that the MWPA is there almost entirely to support, fund, and facilitate collaboration between our local agencies. Through the measure that created the MWPA, our 17 member agencies have 20 million more to spend each year on fuel reduction, but only 2 or 3 of our member agencies really have the capacity to spend those dollars effectively without the help of an additional agency. And the rest would struggle to optimize these dollars, and therefore we would see inequitable use of that money. So really early on, I realized that we're there as a support organization to support all of these agencies and using that money effectively to protect their communities and funnel that towards their interests, what they deem the most important. So that leads into kind of the first part of my service year. Right off the bat, I started meeting with agencies from West Marin, and you can see from the slide that West Marin, or West County West Marin in the slide, is by far our largest zone. The JPA is split up into 5 geographic zones, and West Marin has the largest zone, the least funding, the most difficult regulatory landscape, is almost entirely made up of fire adapted and fire deprived ecosystems. But it's really important for the management of those ecosystems for the safety of Novato, San Rafael, Central Marin, Southern Marin, especially considering during fire season, the prevailing winds come from the northwest. And so in these meetings, the areas of support that continue to come up is assistance with environmental compliance, equipment needs, assistance in project planning, and assistance in partner coordination between state parks and national parks and open space, all having this patchwork of land stewardship out in West Marin. It's very complicated navigating all those different all the different requirements for project planning for each of those agencies. Also, my favorite parts of Marin are West Marin. It's breathtakingly beautiful and and some delightfully quirky people. So here is a project that I helped write the prescription, the field prescription for in Stinson Beach. And the picture on the right is me touring the project site with Fire Chief Perry and Daniel Blair, looking dismally at the endless Echium that butts up against their community. He's got his hands on his hips there. I like to think he's just like, I don't know what I'm going to do about this. And then on the left, there's a little bit, there's a map that shows that patchwork of jurisdictions that I was talking about with Golden Gate National Recreation Area and Mount Tam State Park. And then there's the community of Stinson Beach tucked in between there. And then we've got Caltrans that owns the right of way along Highway 1. And so that's different. And then there's PG&E power lines along the east side of the community. So that's another set of requirements in project planning. So a lot of beyond meeting with and supporting the West Marin agencies, a large part of my year was working on the work plan and also the web portal to create that work plan. So a question that we're going to run into every single year is, how do we spend $20 million across 5 zones and 17 member agencies? And so this work plan is a tool to assist in the creation, use, and monitoring of our projects. Previously, our work plan was something around 1,000 pages. And so for a public that's incredibly interested in what type of work is going on in their community, and member agencies who need to reference this work plan throughout the year, and us, the staff at MWPA, who also need to reference this throughout the year to help manage these projects, over 1,000-page document doesn't really do a lot. I spent a lot of time earlier in the year scrolling through the document endlessly to try and find one small detail. So that was one of the primary objectives of forming this web portal. It also allows us to build goals and objectives into the process. So this past year, we had a committee to identify specific goals and objectives that we'd like to build into the projects, and also project design implementation features that should be built into all the projects that are based off of those goals and objectives. And so it's kind of hard to, when we're not the ones directly writing these projects or managing these projects, it's kind of hard to implement those goals and objectives in any other way than having this web portal that builds it into the process. It helps create transparency throughout and despite the bureaucracy involved in with multiple committees and 17 member agencies that each have their own agendas. and constant redrafts and going back to the drawing board on projects throughout the approval process of this work plan. It's hard to continue to put this information on the process out to the public, but this enables us to do so a lot easier. And then helps us measure the impact over time. So this work plan or the web portal is also going to turn into a project tracking feature once we move through this first year of its existence. So some of the challenges that we faced in creating the web portal was incorporating the needs of member agencies with the needs of the governmental process. So, there was a lot of steps in which we needed to keep certain projects invisible to other agencies because that would be Brown Act incompliant, to have the cooperation or have multiple agencies working on these projects before it went to public meeting. And so there was some frustration on the part of the member agencies, but overall it still was a more collaborative process than years past. Getting buy-in from the member agencies. To a lot of them, it seemed more complicated to be getting all this, to be solicited for feedback on this tool that we were building than just filling out a PDF form. So we needed to keep that in mind and keeping that process as simple as possible. Getting buy-in, so, and then 8+ years of foresight. The measure that created MWPA is for 10 years, and this is our third year of operations. And so, or we just entered our third year. And so looking out that far in advance about what state our ecosystems and our community is going to be 8 years in advance, and how the goals and objectives that we've set now are going to play into the projects that we're planning then, was really difficult. And I learned a lot from my supervisor, Ann Krelock, in that. Balancing our desire for data with our agency's desire for ease. So like I said, with getting the buy-in, making this as simple as possible so it's not a burden on our member agencies, but also at the same time, it can be a tool for us in tracking the MWPA's progress over time. How many questions is too many questions? I went down a whole rabbit hole one day of like word minimums and maximums, and the implications of these when in grant proposals and project proposals. Developing an accessible tool, so one that's not too complicated. It might be easy to us as we're developing it to understand what all these little buttons do, but might not be to all of our member agencies. And then making it compatible with other organizations and their project proposals. So this is like the CAL FIRE grant application. Marin Parks and Open Space has their own work plan, and therefore our work plan process needs to fit into theirs because we have a lot of projects that we're partnering on. So one of my favorite projects that I helped develop through the work plan development process is the Knowledge and Attitude Survey that was approved and will be starting sometime in the fall. It helps address some of the shortcomings of the MWPA and our partners in preaching outside the choir. It's something that we've heard a couple times in board meetings, is that we need to do a better job of preaching outside the choir. We've got some people that are very involved in fire prevention in Marin, but we can't just keep talking to those same people. It doesn't have any added effect. So how do we build relationships with under-resourced and minority communities in Marin? Home hardening, defensible space, and landscape level fuel reduction doesn't apply as much to these communities. And therefore, that's the core of what MWPA does a lot of the time. How do we curate our offerings to these families that live in multifamily housing areas and urban settings, not the way out in the wildland urban interface and single family homes. So this research project will be developed through partnerships with representative groups and requires investment in these relationships rather than just asking for assistance and support without providing any compensation. This project actually builds the team and includes the compensation that should take place through those partnerships. We'll provide guidance to MWPA on how these communities would like to be supported. So I really look forward to that. playing out and the answers that it yields, and also the relationships that are made through that process. And here's a good graphic that I found that demonstrates the co-design process, which isn't a term that I heard before, but in building the project, I learned about community co-design research projects, and so where the community is a part of the team that designs the research project and therefore builds buy-in and trust into the fabric of that research. So another large part of my service here has been working with FireSafe Marin. They've been creating educational content and being the main drivers of wildfire prevention and preparedness outreach since the 90s, long before the MWPA was around. And so they've got many forms of outreach: video, workshops, social media, multimedia ad campaigns, newsletters, a very comprehensive website, working with high schoolers, the Firewise USA program, the list goes on. And I got to help out just by working with this team and all of that, which has been a rewarding experience. One of the most involved parts of that coordination with FireSafe Marin has been Ember Stop. And so this is the first wildfire prevention festival in Marin, and it was another tool to help us preach outside the choir. So we had live music with some bands that actually brought some draw just because they had their own clout. And it also kept things celebratory. Wildfire adaptation naturally trends towards the scary and the morose. And so it was important to have a celebration about all the work that's done in the community and how we're supporting ecosystem health, all the positive sides of wildfire prevention, not just the doom and gloom. It was the first time that FireSafe Marin ever put on an event like this. So we were learning how to do it as we were doing it, and that was exciting and difficult, but really fun. And I want to give a big thanks to Tara, Ellie, Jenna, and Mona for the amazing job that they did in helping at the event. They got so much good feedback, and I think in the video that I'm going to show next, there's a little snippet of what they're. Oh, here also the picture of the wildfire action board. And so all the residents, as they were leaving the island, were greeted by our wonderful GrizzlyCorps fellows, and they had facilitated conversations on what they learned and what they're going to take away and what the actions that they're going to pledge. So go to the video right now. Actually, let's see. I'm running low on time, so I think I'm just going to skip the video.
Josh, it's okay if you want to share it, as long as you're sharing with sound.
Okay. Yeah, it's 1:13, so we got
time.
How's that? Can you hear it?
Yes.
Okay.
The fact that Marin County would create a community festival over the subject of wildfire just shows how seriously they're taking it and how much it's become a part of the public consciousness.
Yeah, so that day exceeded all expectations, and it was definitely a highlight of my service here. So that kind of brings me to tabling, which was something that I tried to attend as many events as possible all the digital and personal forms of outreach that I mentioned on a couple slides ago. They're important to educate and keep wild prevention adaptation at the front of the mind, but I think that face-to-face interactions is far more effective, and you're able to curate every interaction towards the interests and gaps in knowledge, and also just make it more fun. And it keeps my stoke high, getting to learn about the community members that I'm supporting through the service year. So in this picture right here, we've got our game off to the left called Green Bin Toss. We like to call that our everyday wildfire prevention tool. So that one's fun. And then here's a game that I put together, and here's me and Maria demonstrating it, where I would have guests put themselves in the mind of the wildfire and throw embers at the house trying to burn it down. So that obviously was very fun. I think this picture right here says it all, with the fire suppression, throwing an ember at a house trying to burn it down. And then Firewise USA. This is another part of my year. Marin has the most active Firewise involvement in the country, 74 active Firewise sites. These are community networks that built upon neighbor to neighbor interactions. And I think that they hold enormous potential for the communication networks built around pre-existing relationships, the social pressure that can be applied from neighbors. It helps strengthen neighborly relationships, provides support networks to those with access and functional needs, which is especially important in times of evacuation and emergency. And then provides an alternative to agency-driven work. So instead of just relying on these agencies that make up the MWPA to come out and clear the hazardous vegetation from the community, some of our Firewise sites are actually taking upon themselves to do that together, which goes back to enforcing those communal networks. And so that brings me to the end of the presentation. I'd like to thank our executive officer, Mark Brown. He's a treasure trove of information, and he made it clear literally on our first day that he was there to serve us throughout our service year, and truly has followed through on that promise. My supervisor and our planning and program coordinator, Ann Krelock, learned so much from her, and especially regarding complex planning processes and how to navigate difficult conversations and meetings with multiple stakeholders. I reflect almost daily this year on how lucky I am to get to work with her. The entire Fire Safe Marin has been incredibly welcoming, and I'll be staying on with them next year in addition to staying on with MWPA. And they're always a blast. And then finally, it's been such a pleasure laughing with Maria while we stumble through this crash course in environmental governance. She is equal parts thoughtful, hilarious, and hardworking, and I couldn't have asked for a better co-fellow. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Josh. If anyone has any congratulations or questions, feel free to unmute yourself or put anything in the chat.
This is Anne with the MWPA, and I just want to say that Josh has done a really amazing job. It's a really complicated arena to work in with 17 different member agencies, fire agencies, cities, city council members, elected officials, environmental stakeholders, tribal interests. There are just so many things that make it really complicated, and it's 2 steps forward, 1 step back, and Josh just navigated all of it with a smile, and we just really enjoyed all of our time with him, and are glad that he's going to be able to continue working in this community so that we can keep working with Josh. So well done, Josh.
Thank you.
Josh, you got another question